I haven't been paying much attention to Syria for several months because I figured I'd hear about it if anything interesting happened, but the lack of information caught my attention when I found myself going, I wonder whatever happened to Syria. Honestly, I didn't expect the civil war in Syria to last this long, and at first I was concerned. Maybe it ended last week and I'm slowpoke late to the party, but this new article on New York Times indicates otherwise. To summarize it, Syria has a lot of baggage. Al-Assad, that being the guy in control of the government, is fighting a civil war against the Free Syrian Army. And as is the case with the real world, and not people's romanticized view of warfare, it's difficult to identify which side is good and which side is bad. Most of the time there is no good side, just different flavors of bad, and that's what I see with Syria. For the people in the West who still have some sort of passing interest in Syria and didn't forget about it sometime in 2012, most people I talk to seem to think that the rebels are the good guys and al-Assad is the tyrant. But in the real world, while al-Assad may be a tyrant, that doesn't automatically make the rebels the good guys. All I've seen is atrocities committed by both sides and propaganda and smearing released by both sides. The FSA accuses the Syrian government of burning people alive. The Syrian government accuses the FSA of kidnapping people that aren't ideologically aligned with them. The Syrian government accuses the rebels of car bombings and terrorist attacks, and both accuse each other of using chemical weapons. There is no clear picture as to what is propaganda and what is not. It could be that al-Assad's regime is evil and the rebels are a bunch of goody two-shoes, but I don't think that's the case. I think both sides are guilty of doing some pretty nasty stuff. Now, what I hear is that the FSA got in bed with al-Qaeda, whereas the Russians are backing al-Assad. But ultimately, one single factor remains. If the USA got involved, the war would be over in 2 weeks. Plenty of terror bombings after, but the war would end one way or another. So we're not doing much about the issue despite having ample power to do so. It seems that Syria has become a surrogate for cultural warfare. There's quite a few nations that have some sort of investment in how this plays out. Here in the United States, people generally favor the rebels, but that's mainly because we like people fighting against authority, as long as it isn't American authority. So before everyone jumps on the bandwagon and assumes the revolutionaries are the good guys, let's step back and examine it with some objectivity. Now, on one hand, we could let them kill each other, but something doesn't quite sit right with me about watching it all play out when I know it's going to end badly. What I hear is the Free Syrian Army wants to create an Islamic government, whereas al-Assad's regime is secular. Honestly, I don't really care who wins as long as they do what I want them to. I have no desire to see Syria remain under al-Assad's control, nor do I have a desire for the FSA to take control. My concern is for the long-term future of the Syrian people, not the short-term happy feeling of deposing a dictator or crushing a rebellion. And I don't care about people's short-sighted notion of freedom. Here's how I'd do things if I found myself accruing an adequate sum of power in America rapidly enough. I'd want to meet with the leadership of either side on separate occasions for a 3 or 4 hour long discussion, and that would allow me to determine their goals and likelihood of cooperation a bit more. Somewhere near the end of that, I'd present my deal. If I decided to help one of the two sides, I may offer military support, but I find it more likely that I'd offer to supply weapons, food, and medicine. I'd consider lending military support only if I thought the short-term victory can outweigh the long-term risks. Now, in the case of Syria, I think it's more likely that I'd consider lending direct military support, simply because the war's been protracted long enough that I think people will appreciate an abrupt end. I feel enough suffering has been spread all over the nation that it might merit interfering for a more rapid close to the war. But either way, be it direct military support or food, water, weapons, and medicine, regardless of what I offer or who I offer it to, there's a condition to receiving our help. There's something I want in return. Now, if it's the rebels I decide to support, I'd say, you have to make sure you don't set up a tyrannical government on par with the one you overthrow. What normally happens is people fight long and hard for their victory and freedom, and never once do they consider what to do to protect that freedom once they have it. And before you know it, the recently freed people, in their naivete and ignorance, vote their rights away and elect a good old-fashioned fascist state to govern them. Your new government needs to be able to abide by certain human rights and free speech standards, among other standards. You need to form a government that doesn't discriminate against people that are different from you and doesn't oppress or subjugate people. I require reasonable progress from your government's ability to provide for the needs of its citizenry, so rampant starvation isn't an issue. Your schools need to teach critical thinking and give a child the ability to question the world around them, and not indoctrinate people with loyalty to the state or a static way of viewing the world, or forcefully indoctrinating people with what to believe when they have no choice in the matter. This is so your citizenry and children can scrutinize their own government, otherwise you'll become the same fascist state you overthrew. Your new government has to be adequate to this task. I don't care how you do it, I'm not your babysitter, I'm not here to hold your hand, and my soldiers aren't sticking around after the war is over. But you have to adhere to that standard, and if, after a reasonable span of time, you fail, we'll be back to wipe the slate clean so someone else can pick up the pieces and try again. That is my deal. If these terms are unacceptable to you, or if I assess that you cannot meet these terms, if you cannot provide human rights, if you cannot provide critical thinking and a readiness for your citizens' children to question and scrutinize your new regime, if you cannot provide free speech and fair trials and food for the starving, we will not help you. If you agree and fail, we will be back to remove you, and offer the same deal to whatever powerful faction appears in the messy aftermath. If I decide to help al-Assad, the deal would be pretty much the same thing. There are certain standards I want met within a reasonable span of time, and I'd help whichever side I feel is more capable of meeting my requirements. All that's left past that point is for us to keep our word. Over the next 2 years or so, we'll keep tabs on what's going on, maybe provide some teachers and doctors and food for the first while if needed, but we're not going to have our soldiers needlessly occupy the nation. If they're making acceptable progress on meeting the goals we set, considering the challenges they're facing, well and good. Here's what I want for Syria. I want Syria to become a nation that enjoys civilized comforts, a nation where people don't need to worry about high risk of being kidnapped, raped, or starving. A nation where people learn real history and not a dumbed-down and censored version meant to bully their children into blind loyalty to a fascist regime. A nation that enjoys freedom of speech and other civil liberties, as well as the standards of rule of law, without having to trade away their freedom to a fascist state. As such, I'll side with whichever I think is more fit to meet that goal. Every nation deserves a fair shot to be able to call itself the greatest nation in the world. Perhaps in 100 years, Syria can be the world's leading nation in medical research and produce a vast level of scientific papers and have a few Nobel Prize winners. Will that dream be realized? Probably not. But I want Syria to have that chance. I want every nation to have that chance. And you might think, but Balthazar, you don't have the power to offer Syria a future. Why even make this video? Yeah, that's true. I don't have the power, nor do I have enough fame or fortune to influence it. And if I do succeed in obtaining power, it's not very likely it'll be in time to do anything for Syria. So why do it? Why invest the hours and hours it takes to make this video? Why stay up till 3 in the morning? Maybe in the faint gamble that one day one of my videos will go viral and my message will spread. Maybe one day the Western world will care just enough that we can save the next nation that comes along. That'd make me happy. I'll see you next time.